Unspoken Issues.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Unspoken Issues podcast. It's going to be a solo shot today, just me. Today's episode comes just over a month after the passing of one of rock's most infamous icons, Ozzy Osbourne. He left us on July 22nd, 2025. Now, let me tell you how I first came to know who Ozzy was. In about the late 80s, I'm close to 10 years old, starting to explore music more seriously, and of course, MTV was everywhere. For me, Ozzy's legend far outpaced his music at first. The stories, the wild antics, especially the infamous moment in 1983 when he bit the head off of a bat, that's what reached me before the songs ever did. I can still remember my cousin popping in a cassette tape of Iron Man on my grandma's gigantic stereo in the early 90s. That was my first real taste of the music itself. But funny enough, I didn't truly grow an appreciation for Ozzy's music until much later, thanks to, of all things, video games. Bark at the Moon was blasting out of GTA Vice City. War Pigs became a staple for me through Guitar Hero. And then with Spotify and the streaming era, his music was constantly popping up in all those curated metal mixes. Piece by piece, the legend and the music came together for me. So not long after Ozzy passed, I stumbled across something pretty eerie. Rock-It Comix, ROCK-IT, Comics, spelled COMIX, Ozzy Osbourne #1, published back in December of 1993, written by Mike Carey and painted art by Tom Kiffin. The timing made the read chilling. This comic tells the story of Ozzy's death and the choices he has to make in the afterlife. Reading that now, so close to his actual passing, gives the whole book a heavy, kind of haunted feel. In today's episode, here's what you're going to get. A quick history of Rock-It Comix, Malibu's short-lived experiment fusing rock stars and comic books, and a page-by-page description of what happens in Ozzy Osbourne #1. All right, folks, let the madness begin. You ever heard of Rock-It Comix? Rock-It Comix was a short-lived imprint of Malibu Comics dedicated to rock music-themed comic books. Launched in late 1993 and formally debuting in early 1994. The concept of Rock-It Comix emerged from a partnership between Malibu's president Scott Mitchell Rosenberg and music manager Ron Stone of Gold Mountain Entertainment. In 1992, Stone was seeking a novel way to promote his new record label, World Domination, and began exploring a blend of rock and roll and comics. Major publishers like Marvel and DC showed little interest in collaborating with real musicians, preferring to own original characters outright. However, Rosenberg, a self-described fanatic of both comics and music, jumped at the idea of a rock-oriented comics line, seeing a natural cross-pollination between the two cultures. This led Malibu to create Rock-It Comix. This was a specialized imprint for comics starring rock bands and musicians, with Gold Mountain facilitating contracts with artists and bands. A third partner, International Strategic Marketing, led by John Anderson, joined to help distribute the comics beyond traditional comic shops, placing them in music stores, newsstands, and other outlets alongside music magazines. The imprint's public launch was heralded at the San Diego Comic-Con in August 1993, where Malibu promoted the upcoming titles. Rock-It Comix editor Robert V. Conti, whom Malibu hired to spearhead the line, touted that these would be albums of words and pictures, by and about rock artists produced to the highest quality standards. Unlike earlier rock-related comics, Rock-It's books would be fully authorized by the musicians and created with their direct input, a pointed contrast to the unauthorized black and white rock and roll comics that had circulated in previous years. Quote, "What makes us different from revolutionary comics is that we're full color, fully authorized, and we use some of the top professionals in this business," Conti explained, referencing the earlier unauthorized biographical comics published by Revolutionary Comics in the late 80s and early 90s. From the start, Malibu positioned Rock-It Comix as a premium artist-approved product that would engage both comic book fans and rock music fans. It officially kicks off in late 1993 with a burst of one-shot comic magazines featuring popular rock artists. The books were printed in an oversized glossy format to stand out on racks to accommodate bonus content like interviews and photos. Each issue told a fictionalized or dramatized story about a real music act, usually blending biographical elements with fantasy or adventure, depending on the artist's preference. Conti noted that the storylines ranged from straight bio to phantasmagoria, and crucially, the wishes of the musicians involved were treated as gospel in crafting the comics. In other words, the artists themselves collaborated in the writing and approved the artwork, ensuring the comics reflected their own vision. In January to February of 1994, the first Rock-It titles hit the shelves. We have Metallica, a multi-part comic series presenting a stylized historical retrospective of the heavy metal band's career. Metallica's comic was done in a straight biographical style. The band preferred a factual approach here, and was planned as a trilogy of special issues released in early 1994. Part 1 had debuted by early 1994, with Part 2 following in March of 94. Notably, Malibu enlisted writer and artist Marshall Rogers for at least one Metallica issue. Ozzy Osbourne, which we'll be talking about tonight, a one-shot issue inspired by a surreal nightmare Ozzy had, casting the famous metal vocalist as a protagonist in a dark fantasy horror adventure. In the comic story, Ozzy journeys through a netherworld and battles hellish monsters. This issue took a more supernatural metaphoric approach to illustrate themes of Ozzy's life and music. There's also Lita Ford, Heavy Metal Queen, a one-shot starring Lita Ford, former guitarist for the Runaways, in a superheroine role. Ford's comic book persona is an ordinary rock singer who transforms into a costume superpowered heavy metal queen when angered. Lita Ford actively co-wrote her story and worked closely with artist Jim Balent, known for his work on Catwoman and Vampirella, to design her illustrated alter ego. She even provided feedback on artwork details, ensuring guitars and costumes were drawn to her liking, effectively becoming a creative partner in the project. Ford later remarked that seeing herself as a comic heroine was fabulous and wild, and she was so enamored with the costume design that she had it recreated for her own stage shows. Then we have World Domination, the rock and roll comic, a one-shot comic about World Domination Records, the indie label founded by Gold Mountain's Ron Stone. Unlike the other titles, this book was a behind-the-scenes industry story, a satirical painted comic depicting the trials and tribulations of an alternative record label battling the system. Its artwork consisted of striking black and white painted visuals. The issue served as a promotional tie-in for Stone's Real World label, illustrating the challenges of the music business. These initial releases were received with enthusiasm by the niche audience. They rolled out simultaneously to comic book retailers and music retail outlets thanks to the imprint's expanded distribution strategy. In Los Angeles, the famous Golden Apple comic stores prominently featured the Rock-It line, and artists like Ozzy Osbourne even made in-store appearances to sign special editions. Early sales indicated that name recognition and artwork drove interest. Following the launch, Malibu scheduled monthly Rock-It releases throughout 1994. Several more one-shots quickly followed the first wave, featuring a mix of classic rock icons and contemporary 90s artists. Notable titles published by Rock-It Comix in 1994 included Black Sabbath. Notably, Black Sabbath's bassist, lyricist Terrence Geezer Butler co-wrote the comic storyline to ensure authenticity. While the comic introduced supernatural elements as metaphors reflecting the band's occult-inspired image, Butler kept the narrative mostly factual. He and guitarist Tony Iommi opted for a fairly straight historical approach rather than casting the band as literal superheroes. The issue featured stunningly rich artwork, which included extensive bonus material, and an interview with Geezer Butler, where he praised the comic's accuracy, though it does include poetic license. A gallery of rare band photographs, a detailed discography, and even a personal afterword by editor Robert Conti about discovering the band. This lavish format underscored Rock-It's goal of combining comics with collectible music memorabilia. Pantera, a one-shot centered on the popular Texas groove metal band Pantera. According to Malibu, the Pantera comic was full of demonic insanity, implying a storyline that leaned into horror/fantasy elements. Then Santana, a one-shot biography of legendary guitarist Carlos Santana, released in May of 1994. This issue was a true collaborative effort. Malibu brought in acclaimed comic creator Timothy Truman, himself a musician as well as an artist and writer, to illustrate Santana's life story. The comic presented Santana's journey and spiritual outlook through psychedelically illustrated sequences, accompanied by interview-style narration. Santana's book was one of the last Rock-It releases, delving into the musician's search for enlightenment and musical legacy in a visually unique way. In total, Malibu's Rock-It Comix published approximately 7 distinct comic issues in 1993 and 1994. By mid-1994, the imprint had released more than half a dozen titles featuring rock stars. Each was a one-shot, standalone magazine, except Metallica, which spanned multiple issues. The creative teams often paired seasoned comic book talent with input from musicians themselves. As mentioned, International Strategic Marketing, led by John C. Anderson, partnered with Malibu to broaden distribution. ISM helped place Rock-It Comix in record store chains, music boutiques, and on newsstands near music magazines, not just comic specialty shops. This was vital to reach the music fan base. Malibu also coordinated marketing with the band's tours and fan clubs. For instance, they discussed selling comics at concert venues as inexpensive alternatives to tour programs. There was even inclusion of music merchandise. The Lita Ford #1 issue was reportedly sold sealed with a guitar pick aiming at collectors. Promotionally, Malibu leveraged events like Comic-Cons and record store signings to generate buzz. This multi-channel marketing reflected an understanding that Rock-It Comix straddled 2 industries. This team and network of partners gave Rock-It Comix a strong launch. By mid-1994, nearly 30 bands had shown interest or were in talks to appear in the comic line. Confirmed upcoming titles announced that year ranged widely across genres, from classic rock acts like The Doors and Yes to heavy metal groups Megadeth and Anthrax, alternative acts like Soundgarden and Primus, and even hip-hop and R&B artists like Naughty by Nature, PM Dawn, and The Far Side. The imprint also signaled openness to other genres. Mentions of future classical, pop, or country music comics were made. Rock-It Comix was ambitious and eclectic, aiming to be a full-fledged line of music comics that could tap multiple fan bases. However, despite its early momentum, Rock-It Comix was abruptly cut short by larger forces in the comic industry. In late 1994, Marvel Comics acquires Malibu Comics, primarily to prevent Malibu and its profitable Ultraverse superhero line from falling into the hands of rival DC Comics. This corporate acquisition, finalized in November of 1994, had immediate consequences for Malibu's various imprints. Marvel's takeover came at a time when the comic market was contracting. Marvel was streamlining operations amidst a looming industry crash. In the process, Malibu's smaller imprints were deemed expendable. According to Malibu insiders, virtually all non-core lines were terminated once Marvel took control. Malibu's imprints ceased new production unless Marvel chose to continue them. Unfortunately for Rock-It Comix, it was among the first casualties. The Rock-It Comix imprint effectively ended in late 1994, shortly after the Marvel acquisition. The comics that were already published remained on sale, but any in-progress or planned titles were shelved. Malibu had announced a slate of upcoming Rock-It one-shots for late 1994 into 1995, many of which had even been solicited to retailers, but these never saw release. For example, a comic for the psychedelic rock band Yes was well into development. Editor Robert Conti had interviewed Yes's singer John Anderson and scripted an interstellar fantasy adventure for the group, but this Rock-It Comix Yes special was canceled before completion. Similarly, a Megadeth issue planned for March 1994 never materialized, despite being advertised earlier in the year. The plug had been pulled as Marvel folded Malibu's operations into their own. Interestingly, around the same time, Marvel attempted to create its own music-themed comics line separate from Malibu. In late 1994, Marvel launched the Marvel Music imprint under editor Mort Todd, which produced a handful of rock-related comics, including an Alice Cooper horror miniseries by Neil Gaiman, and biographies of musicians like Bob Marley, Kiss, and Jerry Garcia. This could be seen as Marvel's effort to enter the music comic space on its own terms. Marvel Music, however, was also short-lived, from 1994 to 1995, publishing roughly 8 to 9 titles before it was quietly shut down due to poor sales and the company's financial woes. Marvel's president referred to Marvel Music as doomed in retrospect, indicating it did not meet expectations. The failure of Marvel Music underscores that the market for rock comics in the mid-90s was relatively limited. The broader comic speculation bubble had burst by 1994, and novelty imprints struggled. In this climate, it's unsurprising that Marvel did not revive Rock-It Comix either. The company likely saw it as an experiment that had run its course, and Marvel's own attempt confirmed the challenges of that niche. Another reason Rock-It Comix may go untouched is because of the legal complexity. Each issue featured likenesses and possibly trademarks of real performers. Malibu had negotiated permissions for those specific issues, but any reprints or new stories would require fresh agreements with the artists or their estates. After Malibu's dissolution, there was no mechanism to seamlessly extend those deals. Marvel would have had to renegotiate with each band's management to publish new material, or even to reprint the existing Rock-It Comix. Given Marvel's focus in the late 90s on recovering from bankruptcy and maximizing their core properties, pursuing a revival of Rock-It, with all the attendant contracts and royalties that would entail, was not a priority. The legacy of Rock-It Comix is a curious footnote in both comics and music history. During its brief existence, Rock-It Comix produced a set of unique, glossy comic magazines that captured the larger-than-life personas of rock stars in a new medium. It brought together two fan communities, and demonstrated that, with the artist's involvement, comics could be a viable extension of rock and roll storytelling. These comics not only entertained, but also served as collectible memorabilia, complete with interviews and discographies blurring the line between comic book and fan magazine. Ultimately, Rock-It Comix ended not due to creative failure, but due to industry economics and corporate reshuffling. When Malibu Comics was absorbed by Marvel, the imprint became the casualty of the changing tides. The collapse of the comic speculator boom and the near bankruptcy of Marvel in 1996 meant that niche projects like this had to take a backseat to more immediate concerns. Rock-It Comix was an ambitious Malibu Comics imprint that, to this day, those Rock-It issues are sought by dedicated fans of the bands or comic collectors intrigued by the 90s comics boom's more unusual outputs. Rock-It Comix' legacy lives on as part of Malibu Comics lore, a short, colorful burst of rock and roll energy in the pages of comics fondly remembered by those who experienced it, and a unique footnote in the history of comic publishing. It's a sweltering summer night at Castle Donington, the thunderclouds looming above almost as heavy as the anticipation in the crowd. England's heavy metal mecca is alive with energy. The lights flare, the crowd roars, and then he appears. Ozzy Osbourne strides onto the stage like a myth come to life. "I love you," he cries, arms outstretched before launching into a familiar electrifying call. "Let the madness begin." The audience erupts. Banners wave, fans scream. This is more than a concert. It's a resurrection. As the opening riff of Crazy Train hits, time seems to stop. The band explodes into motion and the crowd surrenders to the sound, forgetting the heat, the headaches, and the humdrum of daily life. Nothing exists now but the music and the madness. As Ozzy belts out lyrics, mental wounds still screaming, "I'm going off the rails on a crazy train." He's not just performing, he's conjuring. Each song feels like a spell. Mr. Crowley, Rock and Roll Rebel, Bark at the Moon. It's as if his entire solo career full of twisted legends and monstrous energy, is being summoned on stage. Amid the ecstasy, storm clouds churn above. A pair of security guards keeping the crowd in check glance skyward. One of them mutters that he does not like how the sky looks. There's a tension in the air, thick and electric. Then it happens. A bolt of lightning crashes from the heavens, and the stage is bathed in unnatural light. Ozzy presses forward, still performing, but the storm has other plans. A second sharper bolt, crack, slams directly into him. Screams cut through the music. People rush toward the stage. Ozzy, my God, Ozzy! Panic spreads. His body crumples, and his hand glows with a strange, otherworldly energy. Smoke curls from his skin. Something isn't right. Ozzy awakens alone in a desolate canyon, his hand still glowing from the lightning strike. He struggles to comprehend what's happening. Is this the afterlife? A dream? A hallucination? All he knows is pain and confusion, and the unsettling stench of rotten meat in the air. Meanwhile, from the shadows of the rocks, strange beings stir. One of them declares, "Man down!" Another soul has arrived. A ghoulish figure with a skeletal grin and a spiked guitar licks his lips at the scent of Ozzy's soul, likening it to 11 herbs and spices. Ozzy stumbles through the wasteland disoriented. He questions whether he's dead, drunk, or dreaming, but then something profound interrupts the chaos. A radiant, loving light fills the sky. It's warm, embracing, and intelligent, and it forms a familiar face. Randy Rhoads. The vision of Randy compels Ozzy to rise and run toward it. Though his body is weakened and burning, others are watching closely. The ghoul and his underworld crew, Morlo, Feck, and Sanguina, know the rules of this liminal realm. If Ozzy moves toward the light, he dies. If he retreats, he returns to his body. Either way, they lose him. So their plan is simple. Tempt him into betraying himself, twist his soul, dim the light, and feast on what's left. To them, Ozzy is just another meal, a soul to be broken. But Ozzy, seeing Randy, cries, "Randy, it's me. Ozzy, talk to me, man." And then he hears his full name spoken like a judgment. John Michael Osbourne. The grim rocker steps forward from the shadows, towering and skeletal. Ozzy stares up, stunned. "You have a grim, sepulchral voice, man," he mutters. "In my line of business, it's an asset," the ghoul replies coldly. He introduces himself as the Grim Rocker, Ozzy's eerie skeletal guide through the underworld, a tour guide through the realms of limbo, and offers his hand. Ozzy, ever skeptical, mocks him. "You got any ID? Clippings?" But the rocker doesn't back down. Instead, he spins a surreal metaphor about death being like a tree rooted in soil of the human heart, and he, the Grim Rocker, is the fruit of that tree. Without warning, he unleashes a glittering swirl of white spores in Ozzy's face. Ozzy recoils, choking, trying to understand what's happening, but he's surrounded. These nightmarish figures, part metal, part corpse, part rock and roll, aren't just tormenting him for sport. They want his soul, and in this dreamscape, they have total control. Sanguina prepares to make the first move, to taint Ozzy with sin and weaken the light that protects him. But before that happens, she leans in close to Ozzy, whispering urgently, "Listen carefully, Ozzy. I've got something very important to say to you." Ozzy drifts from the terrifying landscape into a surreal party scene. It's a dreamlike nightclub filled with ghostly guests and psychedelic lighting. A sultry hostess welcomes him, offering champagne or something stronger. But Ozzy declines, muttering that he's off that stuff. He's confused and overwhelmed, feeling like he just snorted a pound of rock salt. He doesn't know where he is or why this party feels both familiar and completely alien. Outside the dream, Sanguina and her ghoulish cohorts observe impatiently. Ozzy is still slowly heading toward the light, toward salvation, and their attempts to snare his soul are proving ineffective. Sanguina urges subtlety. The key is to make him let his guard down. Back inside the dream, the partygoers debate rock history, specifically the origin of Black Sabbath. Ozzy joins the conversation, correcting the record. It wasn't some romantic fairy tale. It was bloody squalid, he says grimly. Prompted to share his story, Ozzy begins from the beginning. He recounts growing up in 1960 Birmingham, a place of hard labor and harder living. His early jobs were grim, first a plumber's mate, then a stint in a slaughterhouse that left him high on speed to get through every day. Eventually, he ended up on an assembly line testing car horns. To Ozzy, this wasn't a life. It was a death sentence. His co-worker Harry didn't seem to mind, but Ozzy was desperate for more. He tried breaking into stores, literally, but his criminal attempts landed him in prison for 3 months. That's where he gave himself his first tattoos. Crude, painful, but a statement of identity. When he got out, he knew he had to escape the fate of the factory floor, so he scrawled a note and pinned it up in a local record shop. Experienced singer looking for a serious band, Ozzy Zig. It sounded cool to him, and this was his shot. And someone answered. Geezer Butler responded to the ad, and the rest is history. Or at least the start of it. The Dream Party guests smugly announced they know the rest, the formation of Black Sabbath, but Ozzy presses further. The band wasn't instantly legendary. It struggled. First they were named Rare Breed, then Polka Tulk, and eventually Earth. They starved, scraping by on petrol money and sandwich scraps, playing any club that had a cancellation. The turning point came outside of cinema. Ozzy and Tony were watching people line up to see a horror film. Tony said something that stuck. People pay money to be scared at the movies. Why not do the same with music? From that moment, they leaned into darkness, menace, and atmosphere. Black Sabbath became the musical embodiment of a horror movie. They created something new, something terrifying, and Ozzy, snarling into the mic, became it. As he wails, a black shape with eyes of fire, the old memories of lyrics swirl together, both nightmare and origin myth. And somewhere in this strange dream, Ozzy finds a flicker of truth about who he is and where he came from. Ozzy's dreamlike journey continues in psychedelic flashbacks and self-reflection. He's seen on stage in his prime, a wild, untamed force of rock and rebellion. You were like a kid with a new toy, a mysterious voice tells him. He had found his role, the wild man, the rock and roll rebel. With his manic energy, Ozzy became a magnet, drawing fans in like nomads to an oasis. Because someone as alive as you was up there singing about death, the voice explains. That contradiction is what made it all so electric, so compelling. Memories come flooding back. Ozzy would goad and taunt American crowds, stirring chaos wherever he went. He was a lunatic prophet of madness, but it only worked because others followed. The narrative voice wonders aloud, how did he keep that energy going for years? You tell me, Ozzy replies. And then the answer lands hard. Drugs and alcohol. Speed, acid, coke. But the real crutch was alcohol. Always alcohol. In industrial quantities. The partygoers in the dream realm close in, pressing Ozzy with veiled accusations disguised as questions. They challenge his claims to genius. Did booze really fuel his brilliance or rob him of it? Did Sharon, his wife, keep him on a short leash, killing his creativity? The jabs get more personal, and the manipulation turns vicious. One guest mocks his sobriety and his marriage. But Ozzy, cornered and insulted, explodes in rage. Bullcrap, he shouts, lashes out at the woman, smashing a bottle and furiously defending his wife. Ozzy has taken the bait. His emotional outburst is exactly what they wanted. The grim rocker realizes that Ozzy is beginning to lose himself to temptation. Ozzy pushes back. He admits that yes, booze and drugs were part of the scene, part of what made the road wild, but they were never the reason he was worth watching. In fact, every bad thing that ever happened to him occurred when he was drunk or stoned. He recounts waking up on an 8-lane highway, taking a leak on a national monument, getting banned from San Antonio, and a particularly infamous incident, a CBS party on the West Coast where Sharon had suggested a theatrical entrance using live doves. He released 2, but the third one, he bit its head off. The memory hits hard, and then Ozzy snaps. He glares at the manipulative partygoers and delivers a final truth. Alcohol never did him a favor. Then, rising with fury, he strikes down Sanguina and snarls, "And don't insult my wife." With a whap, the dream distorts and the illusion of the party begins to crack. Though shaken and manipulated, Ozzy's inner compass still draws him toward the light. He stumbles forward through the dream realm wasteland, but his tormentors aren't finished. The Grim Rocker commands Morlo to take the stage, telling him to make it good. With a grotesque flourish, Morlo conjures a new nightmare. Ozzy is suddenly seated in a mock film studio, as Morlo projects painful memories like scenes from a movie. They revisit a particularly dark moment. Ozzy at his lowest, holed up at the LA Park Hotel after splitting from Black Sabbath. The film flashes back to him lying in a cloud of self-pity, Iron Man playing on someone else's stereo while he spirals into oblivion. "Did you wonder whether it was worth sticking around to hit bottom?" Morlo asks. Ozzy's haunted expression says it all. Morlo continues narrating Ozzy's downfall like a cynical documentary, but then the story shifts to Sharon. It was Sharon who stepped in, who believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Ozzy confirms it. She scraped him out of the trash and helped him rebuild his life. Sharon pushed him to form Blizzard of Oz, and with her support, he began again. The panel transitions to Ozzy's band lineup. Lee Kerslake on drums, Bob Daisley on bass, and a missing piece at guitar. That piece was filled by Randy Rhoads, a young, lean guitarist who would become Ozzy's closest musical partner. "He was my friend," Ozzy says quietly. The ghouls mock the sentiment, but Ozzy doesn't flinch. Randy wasn't just talented, he was family. And then, in a tender shift, we get a glowing tribute. Randy Rhoads is depicted in portrait, quiet, intense, a master with his guitar. Ozzy recalls how Randy's playing was electric, as if he'd plugged his Gibson into a beehive. The sound was sharp and sweet, equal parts power and precision. But the moment is bittersweet. Ozzy mourns the past. The regret lingers. Off to the side, Morlo's greedy voice sneers. "He wouldn't have weaseled out on you if he'd been locked into one of my contracts." The dark forces continue circling, but Ozzy for now is lost in the memory of the one person who helped him reclaim his voice. Ozzy's defiance boils over as he lashes out at Morlo, who dared dismiss Randy Rhoads' death as weaseling out. His pain is palpable. Randy wasn't a footnote. He was a brother, a legend who played his heart out. Still, the tormentors twist even that into a business transaction. "At least you got your money's worth," Morlo sneers, referencing Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. The dream flashes through Ozzy's resurgence. A phoenix rising in 1981, after being left for dead, he climbed out of his grave with drugs, booze, and genius. An impossible rebirth. Newspaper clippings highlight canceled UK dates, exhaustion, breakdowns, but also platinum records. The highs came with steep costs. There was one constant: Sharon. As the montage of fame and pain culminates in a wedding kiss, the narration captures the bittersweet truth. The gold and the girl, the glory, all at one sitting. But with success comes a cost. A grotesque film reel unspools images of devastation, the plane crash that took Randy Rhoads, the grief that followed, and the guilt that Ozzy carries. The real price, Morlo says, is always in the small print. He presents a sinister contract, slick and seductive, promising Ozzy eternal youth, fan devotion, and never-ending madness, all for one small catch. Just sign your soul on the dotted line. Ozzy is stunned. The terms are terrifying. To suffer no pain or loss, but at the price of his soul? Morlo insists it's all for Ozzy's own good. The contract is tight, sharp, beautiful even. But Ozzy sees through it. Still, the pressure mounts. Morlo then delivers a cold, cutting sales pitch. Ozzy's 44 now. He's been touring for decades. No more tours, was his own promise. Isn't it time to let the young men take over? He invokes Ozzy's own doubts and fears. Then he strikes where it hurts. Nobody loves a has-been. Morlo plays both guilt and glory like a fiddle. Yes, Ozzy became a legend. He pioneered a new language of rock. He helped launch the likes of Metallica and Motley Crue, He played Live Aid, but now, is that all over? The implication is brutal. Sign and stay eternal, refuse and fade away. Ozzy stares down the contract, pen in hand, but instead of signing, he calmly asks to borrow their bin, the trash can. This act of defiance enrages his demonic captors. "Are you mad? I was offering you eternal life," one bellows. But Ozzy's response is sharp and grounded. He's not stupid. He knows his children love him. Not the fame, not the legend. The demon lashes out with threats of violence, but Ozzy coolly offers a shaker of salt and dumps it onto Morlo, burning his face in a flash of supernatural agony. Morlo howls in pain, melting into goo, cursing Ozzy to a million hells. Ozzy just smirks and asks, "Is that all, or will you be needing me again?" The illusion cracks. Now Feck, another one of Ozzy's tormentors, is called to take his turn. As Ozzy walks toward the light, Feck is ordered to stop him, to twist the knife, metaphorically and literally. Ozzy stands firm. "Piss off," he says, turning his back. But Feck isn't done. With a swift move, he slashes Ozzy's arm, injecting him with poison, a venom of despair. Ozzy reels, pain shooting through him. Feck sneers, calling it his specialty. "Let yourself fall into the black ocean," he taunts. "It's called despair." Then the dream takes a darker turn. Images swirl, monstrous and surreal. Ozzy is bombarded with nightmarish visions of his own face, distorted and screaming. Behind him looms a monstrous creature, part demon, part horror movie villain. Floating letters spell accusations. Devil, Satan, evil. The crowd that once cheered him now looks rabid. The narration cuts through the chaos. To Ozzy, the monster on stage was always just an act. Part of the performance, no more harmful than a horror flick. But as the 1980s wore on, not everyone was laughing. Some people started to take Ozzy seriously. Too seriously. And these weren't fans. They were critics, zealots. They circled him like wolves, ready to attack. The dreamscape twists again, turning Ozzy's memories into a courtroom of condemnation. A stern council votes to ban him from performing in Boston. Police officers stand ready to arrest him if he violates a bizarre list of banned actions on stage. Everything from decapitating bats to lobsters. Ozzy, half amused and half weary, asks, "Am I allowed to sing?" From there, the accusations grow darker. A preacher thunders that it's righteous to smite evil. A prosecutor declares that Ozzy's music directly caused a young fan's suicide and petitions to charge him with aiding and abetting a felony. Ozzy recalls trying to reason with his accusers, but in this warped reality, Feck mocks him. They weren't interested in negotiating settlements. The tormentor leans in close, offering him a grim alternative. Death as a way to be at peace. The grim rocker urges Feck to hurry. The light Ozzy is moving toward is growing closer, and soon he'll escape into the next life. Feck seizes the moment, pushing hard on Ozzy's vulnerabilities. Memories of depression, drunken rages, missing his children's lives. He calls Ozzy undeserving of their love, telling him the best gift he could give them is to die here and now. The poison in Ozzy's veins, both literal and metaphorical, makes the temptation stronger. For a moment, Ozzy teeters on the edge, but instead of letting go, he clings to consciousness as Ozzy fights to keep moving forward. Then the oncoming light engulfs him, washing over him like water. Memories and realizations flow through him that even if his words were meaningless to some, to others they were precious, like love letters. There were fans who came looking for an idol but found a friend. That real love, undeserved and unearned, is a gift. Images of his family remind him of what truly matters. In a final surge of clarity, Ozzy envisions 1,000 stages and 1,000 versions of himself, flawed yet united. Always in the best of company, and in that moment, there's no space left for despair. Ozzy, still reeling from the fight, faces off with the Grim Rocker. As the Grim Rocker prepares to swing his jagged spiked guitar, he declares his distaste for violence, but makes it clear he's ready to throw down. With a menacing grin, he shouts, "Let's party," and launches into an attack. The skeletal foe reveals he's more than just bones. He's a parasitic life form that devours souls, with the skeletal appearance merely part of the stage act. Promising eternal pain, he charges up his weapon with unholy energy. The grim rocker brings his weaponized guitar down in an effort to kill Ozzy in one fell swoop, but his blow is blocked by a familiar flying V. A blinding golden light erupts and the figure of Randy Rhoads appears, smiling warmly and catching the villain off guard with a simple, "Surprise!" Flames engulf the skeletal attacker, burning away his flesh until he's nothing but ash and molten bone, his screams echoing into nothingness. In the glow, Ozzy embraces Randy, moved by the reunion. Randy shares that he's missed Ozzy too, but jokes he can miss him for a little bit longer. He explains that the fire that they stand in is a gateway to the next life. If Ozzy wants, Randy can guide him through it, or help him find his way back to Earth. As Ozzy drifts between life and death, Randy tells him only 12 seconds have passed since his demise. Below, chaos reigns. Sharon pleads for help while medics declare there's no saving him, pointing out the burns. His child cries desperately for him to wake up. Offered a choice to move on or return, Ozzy firmly says he wants to go home. With approval, Randy leads him towards the way back, quipping about clicking his ruby slippers. Back on stage, medics scramble as Sharon refuses to leave Ozzy. His child clings to him, begging not to let him be taken away. Sharon laments how stupid his death would be. But then a miracle happens. Ozzy, miraculously revived, jokes he'll stick around until someone finds a smart way for him to die. Alive but singed, he embraces his family, declaring he's made a comeback and that there's still a concert to finish. In the finale, Ozzy extends his hand toward the reader, pure defiance in his eyes. A quote from 1983 declares his rock and roll rebellion, rejecting lies and misconceptions. The narration closes on a pounding truth. The heart of metal beats. It's his heart. Listen.